Let's bring into the conversation right now, of course, as we continue to preview the State of the Union, Washington Examiner White House correspondent Christian Datoc, friend of the program. Christian, thanks so much for being with us as we walk our viewers through the preview in the next 20 or 25 minutes or so. From your reporting, Christian, tonight, what is the president's main message going to be? Is it going to be he's ready for possibly 2, 4, 6 more years as president?
We can look at this speech tonight, Andrew, as sort of a soft launch of that 2024 presumed re-election campaign you alluded to. But I think the theme of the night will likely be unity. And you touched on it just before the break. There are 4 specific pillars President Biden says he wants to work with Republicans on in these next 2 years. He will spend substantial time discussing those in detail, but he'll also talk about the economic progress we've seen in these last couple of months. It's going to be a fact-filled speech, and one that I think we're all on our toes waiting to hear what the president's going to say, again, heading into these next 2 years of divided government.
Yeah, Christian, it's always interesting to see as the members make their way into the chamber, who's talking to who, who's not talking to who. And you saw there Congressman George Santos. The camera was kind of zoomed in right on him. No doubt he's given House Speaker, new Speaker McCarthy quite a headache in the first month of the new Congress. We also have a live now look there of the motorcade. Let's talk over the motorcade right now as it, I believe, passes the Kennedy Center there. It looks like, at least, as it makes its way to the Capitol.
Well, again, Andrew, you mentioned George Santos. This is a story that Kevin McCarthy did not want to be dealing with upon picking up the gavel. Republicans wanted to hammer President Biden on his economic principles, the fact that there is so much chaos at the southern border. The last thing he wanted to do was sort of quell dissent within his own ranks, and that's exactly what Representative Santos has presented Republicans. He's, of course, recused himself from sitting on any House committees. That being said, he's given Democrats and other critics of the Republican Party ample ammo to sort of go after these quote-unquote grifters who seem to have hitched their wagon, so to speak, onto the MAGA movement this past year and a half or so.
And of course, you know, Christian, at least during the 2020 campaign, President Biden wanted to, quote, restore the soul of America. And you've heard him time and time again, especially after January 6th. A lot of prominent Democrats talk about threats to democracy. Will we hear that tonight?
We'll certainly hear that, but I think it's especially important for the president to sort of put his hat back on as uniter-in-chief, because quite frankly, much of the American public is not happy with the job he's done uniting these two parties within his first 2 years in office. There was an NBC News poll out from Sunday, I want to say, that showed just 23% of respondents viewed the president as capable of uniting the country. He also scored extremely poorly when it came to being competent to handle the rigors of office, being able to handle a crisis like this Chinese spy balloon we saw last week. This is going to be a very important step for the president towards winning re-election. It's going to kick off tonight here in just a few moments. Again, this is going to be a very different tone we've heard from President Biden. He's railed against these quote-unquote extremist MAGA Republicans. I expect him to take a very different tact, trying to extend an olive branch to work on some of those 4 unity pillars that we mentioned just a few moments ago.
And of course, that's always something to watch in these states of the union. If any members in the audience will, make some type of scene. We've seen that before in the past. History has shown that to us. But also, there's some reporting to suggest House Speaker Kevin McCarthy has possibly, cautioned, warned his members against just that.
That's right, Andrew. Kevin McCarthy had a closed-door meeting with Republicans this morning. He begged everyone to be on their best behavior, so to speak. He also, coming out of that meeting with President Biden last week at the White House, has suggested that he won't pull any stunts up on the dais. He won't be ripping up his copy of the speech like Nancy Pelosi did during President Trump's tenure, which seems like just 4 or 5 years ago. But in reality, it was only 2 or 3 years ago. That was in early 2020 before the coronavirus kicked off. So again, this is a very different tack from McCarthy. He's promised to come at President Biden's agenda with fire and brimstone heading into these debt ceiling negotiations. So I will be very curious to see if any Republicans sort of buck the party leader. Again, dissension in the ranks is the last thing McCarthy wants right now, while he's sort of got the upper hand with the debt ceiling negotiations in flux.
Yeah, I mean, Christian, you and I last spoke, I think, on the 2-year anniversary of the inauguration just last month. And we were talking about what the new House majority will look like, what the opposition will be to the White House. And, you know, a month and a half in, we haven't really seen that manifest itself just yet. Obviously, the debt ceiling negotiations will be one of those key inflection points. But this battle royale everyone is talking about with House Republicans and the Biden White House has not really, manifested itself like I was saying, so much so, and we'll see if this rings hollow. The president put it in his speech. He says, to my Republican friends, if we could work together in the last Congress, there's no reason we can't work together in this new Congress. Do you think that's possibly just focused and geared toward the Senate side?
I think it has to be geared towards the House also. Again, there are these 4 pillars that President Biden wants to accomplish. He's relaunched the Cancer Moonshot Initiative just in the past recent months. He also wants to work with Republicans on stemming the opioid epidemic, trying to clamp down on the mental health crisis. And then again, a topic which members of both parties have been champions of throughout history, really, is advancing healthcare for veterans and veteran families. Those are 4 very, very popular issues that the president is hoping he can work with Republicans on, and they are traditionally issues that Republicans have taken up in recent years. So I don't think this is necessarily just aimed at the Senate. Of course, Democrats hold a razor-thin majority there. These are issues that many Republicans in the House are looking to advance also.
Yeah, and Christian, we're watching, speaking of the Senate, many of the senators there process in. Senator Bernie Sanders, Senator John Kennedy speaking there, Schumer and Sanders. Sanders with a COVID-19 mask on, you see there. So many of the senators making their way into the House chamber. John Ossoff from Georgia. We can see there, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Mark Milley, speaking with Ruben Gallego. So always so interesting to see kind of the power players in Washington, commiserate amongst themselves in the same room. And of course, we wait to see who the designated survivor will be. We don't have that just yet. Christian, let's talk, though, about issues really the president doesn't wade much into. That, of course, I'm thinking of the southern border, immigration. Is that a part of the speech tonight? He made that trip to El Paso before the new year.
The president's going to have to address immigration. Again, this is going to be a broad brush stroke of what his 2024 platform will be, and he has to come out strong on immigration, if only for the fact that Republicans, especially Arkansas Governor Sarah Sanders, plan to make that sort of their line in the sand, which they can attack him on after this speech. And to Republicans' credit, the situation at the border has gotten worse through Biden's first 2 years in office. We've seen, again, in just the last few months, a record number of border apprehensions, both at legal ports of entry and from refugees seeking entry legally. So this is an issue that the president can't dance around. Like you mentioned, he visited El Paso just last month. This is going to be an issue that I think Democrats hope they can sort of flip the script on heading into this new year.
So, Christian, we ought to mention as well who the special guests of the White House are. That was released today. We just saw them. Unfortunately, the camera kind of panned away. I'm going to tell you who they are, though. Bono is going to be there, obviously the lead singer of U2. He's in the gallery. Also, we saw there the Ukrainian ambassador to the United States, Oksana Markarova. Of course, the war in Ukraine, I can imagine, can guarantee you, will bet it's going to be brought up in this speech. Of course, that is a key foreign policy moment for the Biden White House. Also, we saw there as well Brandon Say, 26-year-old Monterey Park resident. He stopped. He disarmed that gunman there who was going to shoot up another dance studio, another dance hall, after that shooter killed 11 people. He was lauded as a hero by so many. He's there tonight in the chamber.
That's right, Andrew. And I can imagine that gun violence will be a major part of this speech. Of course, we had the string of mass shootings in California to start the year. Coupled with that, crime is on the rise again and police incidents. Unfortunately, the killing of Tyree Nichols in particular in Memphis in January, that will be featured heavily in President Biden's remarks. Nichols' family is among the guest list who will be sitting with First Lady Jill Biden and Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff in their special White House box tonight. Those are going to be two of the domestic issues that President Biden hopes to sort of sway back any disillusioned progressive voters, that this won't just be necessarily a unity agenda. This is a president for the progressive wing of the Democratic Party also.
All right, Christian, I haven't mentioned yet, this is kind of, no pun intended, the elephant in the room, but the Chinese spy balloon. You cover the White House each and every day. President Biden, to my surprise, did not kind of come out before the American people on camera, tell us what was going on here. We heard a lot from the White House press shop. We heard a lot from the Pentagon. We heard a lot from the State Department. But this could be his moment to kind of set the record straight about what entirely happened and what we're going to do to hold China accountable. Would you agree?
I certainly agree. China will be heavily featured in the speech. On the balloon in particular, I think sort of the short turnaround between when it was first spotted by news media on Wednesday to this week, to this evening, less than a week has transpired. Of course, it was shot down on Saturday over the Atlantic Ocean. The American people deserve answers. There are a lot of questions about why the president waited 4 to 5 days before ordering the Pentagon to shoot the plane down. He can use this as a forum to explain exactly the timeline on this mission and to sort of characterize how he views the relationship with China, arguably our most important frenemy, so to speak, in the international community. There were some troubling reports in recent weeks about how Air Force generals believe we will be at war with China by 2025. That is certainly not something the president is looking forward to as he begins this re-election tour. So I'd expect China to take up a significant amount of time tonight. And again, the American people do deserve answers specifically on what happened with the spy balloon.
No, that's so interesting. Christian, look at House Speaker McCarthy, Vice President Harris, both hailing from California. McCarthy from Bakersfield, Harris from the Bay Area. They're gaveling in. Christian, stay with us. We just want to listen in to some of this sound.
The joint session will come to order. The chair appoints as members of the committee on the part of the House to escort the President of the United States into the chamber: the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise; the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Emmer; the gentlewoman from New York, Mrs. Stefanik; the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Hudson; the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Palmer; the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Johnson; the gentlewoman from Oregon, Mrs. Chavez DeRemer; the gentlewoman from Virginia, Mrs. Kiggins; the gentleman from New York, Mr. Jeffries; the gentlewoman from Massachusetts, Ms. Clark; the gentleman from California, Mr. Aguilar; the gentleman from California, Mr. Liu; the gentlewoman from Washington, Del Bene; the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Clyburn; the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Neguse; and the gentlewoman from California, Mrs. Chu.
The President of the Senate, at the direction of that body, appoints the following senators as members of the committee on the part of the Senate to escort the President of the United States into the House chamber. The senator from New York.
Okay, so Vice President Harris, Speaker McCarthy, kind of telling us who's going to be escorting the president, both House members and members of the Senate. Chad Pergram, Fox's Capitol Hill correspondent, has said Biden has arrived at the Capitol for the State of the Union, and the White House put out this video of President Biden just moments ago with this preview. Let's watch.
I'm about to head over to give the State of the Union address. But before I do that, I want you to know this. 2 years ago, our country's economy was reeling. COVID controlled our lives, and our democracy faced one of its greatest threats. And folks, in the past 2 years, we've proven again that with every crisis, our country always emerges stronger. I ran for president to rebuild the backbone of this country, the middle class, to unite the country, to restore the soul of this nation. We've made so much progress. But tonight I'm going to talk about how to finish the job. I've never been more optimistic about the future of America than I am right now. So I'll see you at the Capitol.
Okay, President Biden there with that preview. Let's bring in still to the program here on Live Now, Christian Datoc, White House correspondent for the Washington Examiner. And Christian, you said, or you saw there in that video, we're going to finish the job. And I think so many are wondering, what does that mean? Does that mean a run for re-election? Will we get an official announcement for re-election sometime soon? Our sources here at Fox said it's going to come after the speech, but no one knows about timing.
That's right, Andrew. President Biden is making the case that the job isn't finished and he's the man to do it. But that could refer to a number of issues, not just his re-election campaign. Like he mentioned, COVID. The president wants to be viewed as the man who successfully ushered the country through the pandemic to better days. He also wants to be the man who not only completed that post-pandemic economic revival, but set the country up to expand economically in the years to come by bringing back manufacturing jobs, by resetting our trade relationships with countries in East Asia, with countries like China, who, again, are sort of in a stalemate with the U.S., given the war in Ukraine and the battle for hegemony on the international scale. So this is going to be a landmark moment for the president. He has a lot to gain. He also has a lot to lose tonight, should he not be able to sway some of these moderate critics that he is able to, again, complete that job.
And of course, some of those critics always bring up the president's age. So many American voters, this has been shown in polling, think he's just too old for the job. And then you have the Republican response tonight that's going to be with a young female up-and-comer, new Arkansas governor, Sarah Huckabee Sanders. So that's the Republicans' approach. And I believe her press shop has released some excerpts of what she's going to say as well.
That's right. And of course, Governor Sanders cut her teeth in the Trump administration. She served as press secretary for over a year and a half. So I'll expect sort of a bridge between the MAGA movement and where the Republican Party goes from here. Of course, former President Trump has already announced his own White House bid for 2024, but no one knows if he'll actually be the nominee. You have people like Governor DeSantis down in Florida, Senator Tim Scott in South Carolina. Of course, former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley is expected to announce in the coming weeks that she will launch her own White House bid. So the Republican Party has as much to lose and as much to gain as President Biden himself does tonight. This is going to be an important sort of moment for setting the tone for how they handle this president moving towards that 2024 general election.
Yes, and we're just watching second gentleman Doug Emhoff entering there in the upper gallery. And of course, we still await President Biden and the First Lady, but you can see many members of the president's national security team just made their way into the House chamber as well. So we are just about 7 minutes away from the speech itself. Now, as is customary, the president starts delivering his speech at 9:01:30, so about a minute 30 in, where he will begin his address. Now, historically, at least the last two have been about an hour in length, and we're expecting just that as well. And we're on the lookout because usually the White House puts out a full readout of what the speech is and what the speech says. I want to put up this and yet another major headline in the last several months, Christian. Paul Pelosi and the attack on him there in San Francisco. He's in the gallery tonight as well.
That's right. It's good to hear that Mr. Pelosi is recovering from that attack at his San Francisco home last year after the midterm elections. And I think his presence in the room is going to be important for President Biden to continue that narrative of bringing the country together. He hammered that message home leading into the midterms and sort of said, look, just because you're a Republican doesn't mean you're the enemy. But if you're fostering violence, if you're committing violence in the name of political discourse, you are bringing this country backwards. There's no place for political violence in the U.S. in 2023 and moving forward. He will, I'm sure, expand on that notion later tonight.
All right, and everyone, you're just watching the members of the Supreme Court make their way into the House chamber. Of course, Christian, that was one of President Biden's main judiciary accomplishments, getting the first African-American woman nominated and confirmed. Now, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson sits on the court after the retirement announcement there of one of the Supreme Court justices. And so that is going to be some of his legacy. The judiciary is also going to be some of his legacy as well.
The judiciary is going to be a part of every president's legacy moving forward, just because of the way the court system has been politicized in this country, Andrew. And I think it's going to be important again tonight in President's speech. You mentioned Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. I think President Biden wants to talk about how important it is to seat, non-biased justices on the nation's highest court. I don't doubt that he will point back to the Dobbs decision from last year, which, of course, set many states in motion towards banning abortion across this country. Abortion, women's health care, those are also going to be issues the president touches on tonight. Again, this isn't purely the unity agenda. He does need to reassure progressive voters that he is their guy going forward and that he can make sure those priorities, like protecting abortion access, like mandating parental leave, family leave, paid time away from the office, those are issues that he was not able to accomplish in his first 2 years in office. And that's certainly something he wants, or progressives want to see progress on in his next 2 years in office.
Okay, we just saw First Lady Jill Biden has now entered the gallery up there above the House chamber. You can see there U2's Bono, also Speaker Pelosi's husband, Paul Pelosi, who is seated next to the Ukrainian ambassador to the United States. And, you know, Christian, I was struck by the fact what you did see behind the current members of the Supreme Court, two retirees, Justice Breyer and Justice Kennedy, both in the chamber tonight in their robes. And so that's interesting to me. Let's listen to some of the sounds, Christian, while we hear and watch some of the congressional leaders come into the chamber here. Okay, Christian, we're just learning right now as the president's cabinet steps in there to the chamber, Secretary of State Blinken, Treasury Secretary Yellen. We now know who the designated survivor is going to be. This kind of tracks with the reporting that we have gotten all day. Labor Secretary Marty Walsh is the designated survivor for the State of the Union. And Christian, Fox has been reporting today that Walsh is likely leaving the Biden cabinet very soon. Sources tell Fox that he will next head up the NHL Players Association. A source close to Walsh tells our Fox News' Jackie Heinrich the deal is not final and talks are still in the contract stage. So Marty Walsh, the designated survivor tonight, as now a soon-to-be outgoing member of Biden's cabinet.
That's right. Mr. Walsh, of course, being the former mayor of Boston, is a huge hockey fan. I don't know if that factored into his decision to leave the administration, but he will be over at the NHLPA, be tasked with negotiating that labor agreement. Of course, he was a key negotiator through a number of labor-related and supply chain issues for the Biden administration over the past 2 years. There was, of course, the work stoppage at the Port of LA that seriously bottlenecked the supply chain back in 2021. And just this past year, he was able to avoid a strike with the railroad workers and railroad companies. That was going to cause many headaches heading into the holiday season. Marty is, of course, the first member of President Biden's cabinet to depart the White House, but there have been a number of other top White House officials like Brian Deese at the National Economic Council and, of course, Chief of Staff Ron Klain, who have both announced their pending departures after President Biden's State of the Union. It's going to be a new team at the White House, and looks like there's going to be a new head at the Department of Labor. This is, again, an important moment for Biden to sort of bridge the gap between what happened in the past, in the post-pandemic era, and where this country can be going. So it's going to be very interesting to see who he installs as the next Secretary of Labor.
Yeah, and Christian, of course, speaking of the border as well, we just got a glimpse of DHS Secretary Mayorkas there. House Republicans, at least some of them, they want to impeach him over his handling of the border. Now that Republicans are in control of the House, that's going to be quite the headache for the administration, is it not?
It certainly will be. And there is not only the impeachment of Secretary Mayorkas, there are all of these investigations Republicans will be opening into Hunter Biden, into President Biden's handling of classified documents, or mishandling, I guess I should say. Ian Sands, who's the spokesman for the White House counsel, has been hitting this narrative hard. He's trying to say these investigations are only a means of distracting from the economic successes President Biden has ushered in. That being said, we have seen the situation at the border get worse. There's no beating around the bush, so to speak, over the past 2 years. Republicans want answers, and that's why I expect President Biden to at least spend a small, passionate amount of time talking about how he plans to fix the country's broken immigration system later on this evening.
All right, Christian, we have hit the top of the hour, 9 o'clock Eastern there in Washington, D.C., there in the House chamber. I'm Andrew Kraft. Thanks so much for being with us. We were joined by White House correspondent for the Washington Examiner, Christian Datoc. Christian, stick around, but the president is going to speak in about a minute and a half. We're going to put this feed back up. Any last thoughts, Christian?
I'm excited to see what the president has to say tonight, Andrew. It's a very important moment in his tenure as president. It's an important moment for the nation. I think it's an important moment for bipartisanship going forward. So I'm just as excited as everyone at home to watch the president deliver his second State of the Union address. Of course, it's his third joint address to Congress. It should be a good one later on tonight.
All right, Christian, thanks so much.